Welcome to Parish and Community. Today our guest is Billy Critchley Menor, who is in formation as a Jesuit. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So how did you decide to become a Jesuit? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, well, I actually wanted to be a priest for as long as I can remember. So from when, I was very young, I had a desire for the priesthood. I remember my mom works for the Diocese of Duluth, Minnesota, where I'm from, and so we're always very involved in church events and the parish. Went to Catholic school, and it was especially we would go to these grand liturgies. We would go to ordinations every year, into the Chrism Mass, and I remember from a very young age being very taken by these liturgies, just moved by their beauty and their grandeur, and felt quite deeply that there was something beautiful here, something that was drawing me. And I think that desire, so when I was young, that was like, okay, I want to be a priest when I grow up. And I would play mass and everything, but that desire, that attraction to the beauty of the church never left. And when I was in high school, I started thinking more about it, and was sort of thinking about that desire and the attraction of the church and the sacraments and the liturgy, alongside my interests in things like working with the poor, community organizing, teaching, a desire to do other type of work. And the Jesuits were a way where I could bridge those interests, being both in the world and active in the world, and yet totally devoted to the church and the liturgical sacramental life.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What and how long? How much more do you have to go? What's your formation process? Where are you in formation?
I'm in my 6th year of formation, so I did 2 years of the novitiate, and this is my 4th year now here in St. Louis, my last semester in St. Louis, and I have about 6 years left until ordination.
Okay, and you're here because you're getting your master's at SLU, is that right?
I'm getting a master's in American Studies.
You are also involved with a publication called the Jesuit Post. Is that right? What's your hope for the Jesuit Post?
So the Jesuit Post is a website for that Jesuits information write about spirituality, current events, and pop culture, trying to sort of practice the Jesuit motto, finding God in all things. And so I'm an editor there. I solicit and edit pieces from other Jesuits information, and I also do some writing myself. And I guess my hope for the Jesuit Post is very simple. It's just that people who come across the website and our platforms on social media will be, helped in their desire and their journey of encountering God and through the Catholic Church. That's really, that's my desire. That's my hope for it. And I think that it does that for a good number of people. They are, touched by different reflections and encouraged by younger people in the church writing about their own spiritual journeys. And so, yeah.
Is it that element of the youthfulness involved, or the fresh? I'm trying to get at what it is in particular that Jesuits in formation are contributing to this site. That's a particular kind of subset of folks. So
right, yeah, that's probably the only thing. The young, fresh nature of it, because we're not, none of us are professional journalists. None of us really know actually what we're doing at all, but we write about whatever it is we're writing about. We write about it in the context of our Jesuit life and the people we come in contact. And we're writing publicly as, men who are committed to being Catholic. And so I think whatever that means for people, hopefully it's encouraging and consoling. And yeah.
Now I've seen your bio on the site, and there's a line in there about like uh, your interest in how Catholic sisters have changed the world. So I feel like I'm obligated to ask you, how have Catholic sisters changed the world?
Yes, well, that's a wonderful question. And I didn't say it at the beginning. I gave you the short version of my vocation story to the Jesuits. But another very important part of that was the inspiration of Catholic sisters. When I was in high school, I went to a public high school. And, a lot of the people at my school didn't really get, the whole Catholic thing or, like a lot of young people today, they're just like, either disaffiliating or totally disillusioned with institutional religion. And I was so, gung-ho about the whole thing. And the best way that I could find to explain to people the beauty of the church in ways that they would understand and be inspired by was the stories of Catholic sisters. Because there's just something about some of these stories that you can't argue with, things like Sister Margaret Schlechte, she's the foundress of the Sisters of Social Service. She and her sister, she was the first woman elected to parliament in Hungary. Her sisters organized the suffrage movement in the country. And also women like Sister Megan Rice, who was incarcerated for 3 years, starting in 2014, I think, for breaking into a nuclear facility in Tennessee. In her 80s, she broke through a fence, climbed this hill, protesting the use of and the stockpiling and nuclear weapons by the United States government. And there's so many stories. Needless to say, the vast network of institutions, both educational and social service institutions that sisters have run and continue to run in the United States. These women were running institutions of higher learning before women could have their own bank accounts in this. And so I think there's just something that's so incredibly inspiring about their heroic lives that they've given to other people. And I think it's especially poignant today to think about these women, many of whom were involved in the early feminist movements and the first wave of feminism, you find that places of deepest suffering or deepest injustice in the world, I always say, and you will find a none close by. So I think there's a whole variety of ways in which I feel they've changed the world. But I think the biggest one is they give us a window into understanding and making religious faith more understandable or more accessible to young people today. They walk both this deep commitment, kind of like I was saying earlier about why I was drawn to the Jesuits. They're deeply committed to the world, believing in suffering in the world, and yet the thing that drives them is their connection to transcendence and their constant seeking of God. So,
not to mention that when a religious sister is thrown in jail, the jail ends up becoming like a convent. I've noted it. You're not really punishing a religious sister by confining them to a space and serving them particular meals at particular times. You've participated in a number of conversations with our parish with anti-racism, and I understand that's a subject of your studies as well. So what have you been learning through your master's education about particularly American Catholicism and race?
Yeah. Well, a lot of things. I've learned a lot, which I'm really grateful for. I think being in St. Louis and being the time that we are in our culture and society, it's been a really fantastic time and place to be studying race and racism in the Catholic Church. So I guess a few things. I wrote my capstone paper for my undergraduate degree, which I just completed at St. Louis U last year, and now I'm working on the master's. But I wrote it on a group called the National Black Catholic Sisters Conference and their connection to the Black Power movement. So following up on the Catholic Sisters question. And, you know, one of the things that I learned from studying their stories and their archives, along with a lot of secondary research about them from a scholar named Shannon D. Williams, is that when you look at the lives of Black Catholics and Black Catholic sisters in particular, sort of your perception or the dominant narratives about the Catholic Church change, because you suddenly, the racism that was deeply entrenched in religious life and within the church comes into greater relief in ways that it can hide itself when we focus only on the stories of white Catholics.
Right.
So one example, here close to home, we often hear the stories about Father Claude Heighthouse, who gave a famous sermon at College Church, and it led to the integration of the university. And when we focus, you know, solely on white Catholic actors, that's a really wonderful, inspiring story, right? That this white Jesuit had the guts to give this homily, and then all the other white Jesuits at the university decided that they would integrate the university. But when you focus on Black actors and Black Catholic actors, the story becomes different. One, you can't ignore, or you can't, you know, ride quickly over the fact that what the segregation of the university and the Catholic school system, what that caused for gaps in a variety of different opportunities between white Catholics and Catholics of color. But also we lose the fact that there were Black Catholics who were organizing for the integration of St. Louis University long before white Jesuits decided that it was a good idea. That Black Catholic actors were putting pressure on these white priests to do this. And that they, right, they are the agents in the story of integration, in the story of pushing the church towards greater holiness. And this is the case throughout all of the history of the American Catholic Church, right? There was a group of people, again, this is what Dr. Shannon D. Williams has taught me. Black Catholics never had to be told that enslaving people was wrong.
Right.
They never had to be told that segregated spaces were wrong. They knew inherently the bedrock of Catholic social teaching and of Catholic teaching in general, that when we're baptized, we're equally baptized into the body of Christ, and it gives us an equal dignity. White Catholics needed to be taught that. And in fact, they were very, very resistant to that core fundamental belief of Catholicism. And so when we look at Black Catholics, we see the church and the faith being practiced in a very authentic way, that it wasn't being practiced by most communities.
You mentioning the white Jesuits at College Church makes me think too about the anti-racism work we're trying to do as a majority white parish. And I'm curious to hear how you would talk about how to make sure that the anti-racism work does not become white saviorism work.
Right. Yeah, well, that's an important thing to be aware of, I think. What would I say about that? I guess, well, thinking about the, you know, the narratives of these Jesuits in the 50s and 60s who were doing work that they described as the interracial apostolate. And a lot of it was white Jesuits deciding what they thought was best for people of color. Rather than asking questions like, how are we as a religious order being complicit in the structures and the influences of racism?
Right.
And so instead of, James Baldwin talks about, you know, the question of racism used to be termed the Negro problem. And James Baldwin said, no, this is actually the white problem.
Right.
And I think that that helps us shift. What are the problems? Not within the Black community that white people or white institutions need to solve.
Mm.
What are the blind spots or the moral, shortcomings within white communities that we need to shore up and shine light on, without the assumption then that, like thinking about college church, without the assumption that we're going to make this space, to be truly anti-racist. This is a space where, there's going to be a lot of Black people worshiping here.
Right.
No, I mean, that's not necessarily what an anti-racist parish looks like. As long as, if it's welcoming and Black people or people of color feel comfortable in the parish, I think obviously that's important. But an organization that is, majority white can still be and still should be, an anti-racist organization. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, thank you. That really helps.
and I should say I'm, obviously not an expert on this, so I'm still learning and always open to other people's thoughts and experiences on that.
Sure. Tell me about something else I read from you on the Jesuit Post was the story of your pilgrimage that took you to Father Dan Barrigan's funeral. And I was not familiar with this pilgrimage concept in the training up of the formation of Jesuits. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the pilgrimage, it's a great experience. Everybody's favorite thing to ask about in Jesuit formation. The pilgrimage we take in our first year. So I'm a member of the Midwest province. This is how we do it in my province. We do it in our first year in the spring of our first year, and we get $35, and we get a one-way bus ticket somewhere in the country, and we are told not to be back to the novitiate for 30 days. And the purpose of the pilgrimage is to place, St. Ignatius writes this in the Constitutions about the pilgrimage. He says the purpose is to give the novice an opportunity to place his trust entirely in his Creator and Lord. And so it's a practice of relying on divine providence, really. And it does have that effect. When you have a one-way ticket and $35, and now, of course, I think it's important to say this is a simulated experience.
Yes.
Some people live in such precarious conditions all their life.
Sure.
And to have a one-way bus ticket across the country and $35, many people have had to learn skills in which that would actually not be too difficult of a situation, or I'm sure it would be difficult, but it wouldn't be as jarring or uncomfortable maybe as it was for someone who grew up in relative privilege.
Right.
And so when you're in that experience and these, having needs that you've never had before, having to beg for food, having to find places to sleep, sometimes sleeping outside, you have ample opportunities to place your trust in divine providence. And we do it right, it's like 2 months after we do the spiritual exercises, which is the 30-day silent retreat. And it's also an opportunity for when everything in your life becomes unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly the thing that is familiar is your prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize the way in which God makes himself known and present across times, across spaces, across experiences. That God is sort of the constant. So, when you're on a 4-day, 4-night Greyhound bus trip and, riding through, the middle of America in the middle of the night, God is present. And so I guess that's a bit about the pilgrimage.
And then tell me about how you came across, how you became familiar with Daniel Barrigan and his story, and what compelled you towards his funeral.
I don't remember where it was that I first encountered Dan Barrigan in his story. I think I've always had an interest in Catholics. This kind of gets back to the Catholic sister thing. Catholics who are involved in the public square, and that their lives have sort of meaning for people who maybe are not immediately connected to their Catholicism. So Dan Barrigan he was on the FBI's most wanted list for his protest of the Vietnam War. And he became sort of famous for this. He was on the cover of Time magazine. And so he was someone who had an impact and had a place in American culture that was not only because he was a priest, but his priesthood was brought into those spaces. And of course, Dan would say, the reason he was participating in these actions was entirely because of his faith. That's what motivated him.
Sure.
And the more and more I have read about Dan Barrigan, I've read by Dan Barrigan, I am so deeply challenged by his life, as I think anyone probably would be if they read some of his writings. I think it's very safe to say he was an American prophet, prophet within the church, someone who was totally indifferent to the consequences of living a Christian life. Which he was so indifferent, he spent, many years in jail. He lived a very poor life, and people think he's a lunatic, right? I mean, that's the consequence of perhaps actually living the gospel in, late 20th, 21st century America. You look you look crazy, and Dan Barrigan, I think, looks crazy to a lot of people, and I'm still trying to sort out what that means for me. I'll probably do it, my whole life, what it means to live the gospel and live a faithful life to the teachings of Jesus and as a companion of Jesus. So, yeah.
Well, that's a good note to end on, to encourage other folks to think about what that means for themselves too.
For sure.
Thank you so much, Billy. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation.